Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to welcome you at Amandari Library for the very first live book club of Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. And I'm very delighted to have four incredible women authors here with me. We have Tracey Lien, author of All That's Left Unsaid and previously reporter of the Los Angeles Times. We also have Claudia Bellante, freelance journalist and author of children's book series Latido de Alas. We have journalist and author of Acts of Desperation and Ordinary Human Failings, Megan Nolan. And lastly, we have literary scholar and author of Macrame and Jalan Lahir, Dias Novita Wuri. Today, we're just going to have a relaxed discussion on books, reading, and writing. Hopefully, it's going to be fun, but also impactful. So to start, do you want to tell us a little bit about your work and why you got into writing?
Thank you. I started writing when I was probably 10 or something. But professionally, I started publishing short stories in 2012, and then my first book was published in 2017. The second book in Indonesian was published in 2021, and this year it's out in English globally. So if you're interested, please check it out. Yes, I cannot be compared with the others because I'm a journalist. So when I decided to write the series for children books, it was because I've just had my daughter, and I wanted to explain her all the different, beautiful, and also ugly stories that I found during my career. And I realized that I always write for adult people about adults, and I never wrote about children for children. So that was I wanted to do, but I'm not very good with the imagination, I suppose, and I also believe that the reality is more than fun, that any imagination that you can have. So what I found was look for stories of children in complex part of the world, and from them to make short stories with beautiful illustration, not made by me. And so this is a series, and it was translated in English last year and this year, because there are four, and so that's what's the reason they...
Yeah. I think more adults should go back into reading children's books.
So my novel is All That's Left Unsaid, and it's a literary murder mystery set in Cabramatta, which is a real suburb in Sydney, Australia. And the story begins when a 17-year-old boy is beaten to death at a Cabramatta restaurant. And when his older sister comes home for the funeral, she learns that the police are completely stumped by his case. About a dozen witnesses were present, and they all claim to have seen nothing. So she takes it upon herself to track down each witness to find out what happened. And the reason I started working on it, as Laksmi mentioned, I used to be a journalist. The reason I got into journalism was because I wanted to tell stories that would hopefully change the way people saw the world in some way. Perhaps stories that people would remember a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. And around the time that Donald Trump was elected, my job changed, and it felt like every day was a new crisis. And then I didn't really have the time to tell those stories anymore. So then I turned to fiction, and so that's what I've been doing ever since.
That sounds super amazing. I really want to read your book now. And if anyone have questions, we're going to also have a Q&A sessions towards the end. And last but not least, Megan.
Hi. I also was a journalist for 5 or 6 years before I published my novel. That was mostly cultural criticism and personal essays and long-form book criticism. And then I initially planned to write a collection of essays on the theme of my debut novel, which is sort of about obsessive love and about women losing their identity within love. And then when I started to write that nonfiction book, it just didn't feel like I was able to achieve everything that I was trying to do with it in essay form. So then I decided to try it as a novel instead. That was my debut, Acts of Desperation, which was in 2021. And then my new book, Ordinary Human Failings, just came out in the UK in July and is out in the US and globally in February next year. And that's a very different book. The other one is quite transparent, biographical, and to do with my experiences, even though they're fictionalized. And this is also a kind of literary murder novel, which it begins with the inciting incident is a child in a London council estate is suspected of killing another child who has been found dead. And then I sort of used that event as a catalyst to investigate a family of Irish immigrants who have arrived to London 10 years before this and go back into their lives all the way back to, it goes in phases back in the 70s and then into the 50s for their father. And it's basically a family story, which is told through the lens of this terrible crime. I also continue to write journalism, but mostly fiction nowadays, yeah.
Amazing. So I'm really curious, what are your favorite books to read? Is it the same with what you actually like to write or you want to write or you've been inspired to write?
Yeah, actually the reason that I wrote the second book is because my first book did quite well, but it's not really the sort of book that I like to read. Yeah. This was an attempt to write the sort of book that I actually like to read. And I didn't really feel the authority to try and write a book like this on my first go. I didn't think I could be a novelist, really. I thought I was always going to write nonfiction. And I thought that was, even though I love novels more than anything else, I sort of had accepted the fact that my skill set was in nonfiction. And therefore, my first novel was, whenever you look back on something you did as a younger person, it's very embarrassing, obviously. And even though the novel and my debut came out only 2.5, 3 years ago, but I wrote it when I was 26, which is 8 years ago now. You know, I can really see when I read it now, the fact that I didn't feel able to allow myself to write fiction fully and was like only allowing myself to write autobiographically. And so, yeah, what I like to read best are family stories and family sagas, basically. And I find that the most satisfying thing to read.
Don't tell me Twilight.
No, I've actually never read Twilight
stories. Yeah, so what's the book?
I started out read my favorite when I was a teenager. My favorite book was Of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham, which is it's like a birth to death. It's kind of Dickensian way of storytelling where you meet this person when he's 6 years old and you follow his entire life until he dies. And I find that a really satisfying kind of thing to read. It is like a layered family drama that goes back into generations, and you see how those past lives are impacting their present. And that's kind of what I like to read best, mostly.
Have you read 100 Years of Solitude?
I have, yeah. I love that.
Is that the kind of books that you gravitate towards?
Yeah, exactly. Something that's like quite dense. You just feel like you can spend a very long time both actually reading, but also like in this world with the book. And that's my favorite thing to read, really. Yeah.
No, what's happened to me is that I not love books, but I also am normally very interested in the life of the authors, the writers. So, for example, when I was pre-adolescent or like that, I was completely in love with Beat Generation. And so I started to read the Kerouac and Ferlinghetti, but also I was very interested about like minor characters of the movement. So one of my favorite books was Memories of a Beatnik of Diane Di Prima. And I also love Fernanda Pivano, that was the translator who brought to Italy all the Beat Generation writers, but also Hemingway. So, and later I fall in love again with the Mexico in the 20s. So, but not only the story of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, but also I loved Naui Olin and Tina Modotti. And so it's something that for me it's important to know the context and to know the life of the writers more than with the books.
So did that kind of inspire you to do a lot of work in South America, or was it because you were in South America that you became interested in reading about?
I really don't know exactly when I started to be. Yes, because at the university there was in the first year of the Erasmus program. So with the Erasmus program, I wanted to go to Barcelona. And when I went to Barcelona, because I was traveled to Barcelona before, and I fall in love with the city. So when I had the opportunity, and in that time I started to speak Spanish, and for me, like a journalist, it's easier to travel in places where I can understand a grandmother, like a very small kids, because I don't need translator or fixer. So in that time, I traveled to go to Spain, and then from Spain to Yes, and my fascinating with Mexico maybe started when I was in that time, and with the first travel with friends.
And then you started getting into the books.
Yes, but I've never thought that I'm going to write books, really.
Yeah.
I always saw myself like a journalist. So no, and later it's true that it's funny. And so now, for example, I'm finishing a graphic novel. But I don't know why I put myself in condition when I normally not, because I never wrote children's book and I decided to do that. And I've never write a graphic novel and say, why not? So it's...
Perhaps that's similar to Tracey. You didn't want to write a book, but you wanted to, express how you were feeling, basically, because of all these issues around the world that you were reporting on a daily basis.
So yeah, like when I quit my job as a journalist and I went to get my master's degree in creative writing because I figured, let's learn other ways of telling stories, because I still loved writing, but I knew I didn't want to do journalism. And in my first semester, I took a workshop, and that's where you write stories, you share it with your classmates, they read it, they give you feedback, you just keep doing it until you get better. And at the end of my first semester, a classmate said to me, are you writing a short story collection? And I said, I don't think so. Like, what makes you say that? And they said, well, you've submitted 4 stories this semester. They're all told from the point of view of young Asian girls living in a place called Cabramatta in the 90s. Seems pretty connected. And I was like, oh, I'm clearly circling something. What could it be? And so it was like the practice of just writing and reading and I guess just learning new techniques and seeing what's possible. Like it was just clearly a way for me to tell a story that I hoped could last and would have an impact on people. And then in terms of what I like reading, I really like asking other people what their favorites are and then seeking those out. And even if I end up hating them, I like to think about, okay, well, what was the appeal of this book then for that person? And what can I learn from it? So it's for me, it's all about like stretching.
It's also kind of like market research.
yeah, it's like a friend of mine, their favorite book is 100 Years of Solitude.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, my brain is really stretching while I'm reading this. Like, it's not an easy book. No, but it can be incredibly rewarding. And I was like, oh, now I'm trying to understand, like, why is it this friend's favorite? And applying it to everyone I know, and suddenly I have a very long reading list.
But I'm so sorry. I don't think we can ask everyone what their favorite books are today. But we have time to ask you what do you like to read?
So, like all the nerds in my generation, I fell in love with Harry Potter first. But I started writing way before that because my father wrote short stories as well. And after that, I was introduced to the world of writing, and to me, it feels like it's not like a dream or a profession that I wanted to do. It's just like the way of breathing. It is the way I lived and the way I processed my daily life and my suffering and my struggle. And then it somehow became like some sort of accident. I got published and like recruited. I met a wonderful editor, and I was completely nobody, and he was interested in what I wrote, and I didn't know anyone in the Indonesian literary world. But here I am now, about 10 years later. I know a lot more people also in the international literary world, and I'm so grateful for that. And of course, as a scholar, I studied Russian literature, so I read a lot of Tolstoy, for example. I still love Tolstoy, but then after reading this interview by Intan Paramadita one day, and she was also asked, what is your favorite book? Who is your favorite author? And then she realized, why is it all men? And then after that, I stopped reading men. Yes. So right now, I only read women, and I only buy women, unless, for example, Andre, because, well, he will be on panel with me, so I have to buy his book. He's a great writer anyway. But I made a conscious choice to only read and buy women as much as I can. And my favorite nowadays is mostly Asian author like Han Kang, the writer of Vegetarian, and Ruth Lozecki, who's an American and Japanese author, and Louis Gluck, who died sadly like a week ago, and I'm still pretty sad about that.
So besides you realizing that you were only reading works by men, has your relationship changed in terms of reading after you became, I guess, professionally a writer? If anyone, felt that their relationship to reading has changed? Like maybe perhaps in the past you were just reading for fun, but because you're a writer, you're reading, like you're analyzing everything about the book. So I'm just curious because I think I'm the only one here who's not a writer.
Yeah, I have found that very strongly actually because once you publish a novel, or actually before I published a novel, because I was writing about books, I get sent a huge number of early proofs of new novels, which is wonderful and like a huge privilege. But then because they're free and they're often really good, it meant that I realized about a year ago that I hadn't read anything that wasn't contemporary fiction in 2-3 years. And that made me feel really sad and like I was not using reading correctly anymore. Because I guess like part of what is very moving about literature to me is this feeling of like reaching out to somebody who you don't actually know and reaching through time in that way. Once I kind of like realized this and made an effort to be reading older work again, I kind of reconnected with reading in a better way. And I do have like a little bit of why I like to read in the first place back now. And, like obviously I love contemporary fiction and that's mostly what I still read, but it's good to broaden out a little bit as well, obviously. Yeah.
And what about you?
No, to be honest, I don't think that the way I'm reading the books is different. And it's true that maybe I can recognize when the books is very good or not. But I think that it's because I'm a reader, not because I'm a writer. So reading, you develop this capacity, not because I always read for fun or curiosity.
Yeah, I think since I started writing fiction, I read to see what's possible. Like I might think like, oh, am I inventing something completely original? And then I'll see that someone else has already done it. And it's like, oh, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's already been done before and it's probably been done in a masterful way. So what can I learn from it? So I'm sort of always looking for ways to help my own writing. And, if like, it's not as if I can mimic another writer either. If I could, I absolutely would. But since I can't, it's more about just hoping that I can learn specific things from as many authors as possible.
I read this quote once. It says, "The originality is not novelty, it's sincerity." So it's really nice that you brought up, I guess, sometimes that struggle that you want to create something new, but we don't often need to think about that. We just need to be honest in ourselves and in our writing to really, create work that feels like something fresh, like a fresh air.
Yeah, there was one of the best pieces of advice I received was from the author Rudy Umbriger. And so she wrote Honor and The Space Between Us. And she visited my grad school program in my first year. And I was sort of expressing my insecurity to her. I was like, I sort of just write like a journalist. Like when my sentences are really short, I write like a reporter. And, fiction, like I see really embroidered language and lyrical language, and I feel like a fraud. I've got imposter syndrome. And she said, look, a grain of sand on the beach does not wonder where it will be tomorrow. It just allows the tide to bring it in and take it out and bring it in and take it out. And then years from now, it ends up somewhere completely different. So if you just keep showing up every day and write, you will change as a writer. Your voice will change and you won't even have to think about it. And so from then on, I could stop worrying about like, can I sound like, I don't know, George Saunders or Harper Lee or whoever, and just focus on myself.
My next question might seem a little bit stupid to ask this to writers, but because I feel like, for a year, I've been campaigning on the importance of reading and literacy. I want to know from your point of views, why do you think reading is so important? Just to share to the audience and Indonesians out there that, didn't grow up, I feel like, with the privilege of having parents that really care about literature.
I remember, if I can start, I asked my mother if she liked to read, and which she was never allowed to read because my grandmother thought that it was a lazy person doing. Like, if you read, then you're just sitting down and, like, look lazy. So basically, that's why she didn't like to read. And for some reason, I like to read. And to me, it's really important. Reading is opening our mind, and it allows us to peek into other people's souls and to learn more in a very intimate way that we cannot just achieve by just talking or just by listening. And I mean, of course, reading is listening, I think, in the end, but it's a very important part of life for me. And I really appreciate your work because I know literacy in Indonesia is still a big problem.
No, I completely agree. I think that what we were talking about too is important because if you read, you improve your language. And if you improve your language, you improve your critical thinking. And define the things, define ourselves, and define what's happening around. It's important because if we continue to simplify, this is the problem that we have now, because people don't understand what they read. They don't read. If they read, they don't understand. So this is a big problem. And if you have few words, you have few capacity to understand the world. And finally, what we have, that everything is black or white and conflicts. So reading is about empathy, is about capacity to understand. And hopefully we have more lazy people reading and not fighting around the world. Because yeah, we need more lazy people for world peace.
Thank you, Mom, saying that I'm lazy.
Thank you, Mom. But can I just ask you a little bit about maybe the way that your parents brought you up? Because I saw you with your camera, and I feel like I see you as such a passionate journalist. How did that happen? Like, what made you become the person that you are today?
I really don't know because my
no, you were lazy.
I really love my parents totally. Also because I was adopted when I was like 18 days, so I'm the luckiest person in the world, and my father really saved my life. So we have a beautiful relationship. They don't like to travel a lot. But that is true. They both reading a lot, and my house always has been full of books. That was not happening, for example, in my aunt's house, that she have one book, and I perfectly remember. They has a lot of magazines about cars, for example, and one book. And once I go there and say, please, can you give me the book that you have? Because I love the objects. And I think that happens because you have the objects around you. I like to have books around me. And then I think that when we talk about e-books, I don't want to be conservative, but the things that you love, papers, I think that, and if you see books around you, you need them. If we stop to see books, we stop to need them. And so but coming back to me, I don't know. I think that I'm only curious, and to be a journalist, it's a perfect excuse to speak and to investigate this world that normally I cannot have access. So it's a way to say, this is interesting. So I want to know deep, and I have the perfect excuse.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We'll get back to ebook, but then get back to ebook. And what about you and Tracey?
I was very lucky. My dad is a writer. He writes plays, and I had a really interesting, weird childhood, and grew up in theaters a lot, and spent a lot of my time there. So yeah, that was its own thing. He doesn't write fiction or anything else. He doesn't write prose, rather. But that was its own, interesting way to understand writing. But also, he and I are temperamentally very similar. We're both very overly sensitive, overthinkers, worried people. And I think he recognized that in me when I was really little, and he kind of like taught me to use reading as a way to help that. Like the most basic way that I appreciate reading is that it's like a consolation and a distraction in two different ways. Like one, even if it's like the trashiest book on earth, it's an incredibly immersive experience. It's kind of like one of the only immersive experiences that is left to us with the internet being so constantly present in our lives. Like watching a movie in a cinema or fully reading a book are like two of the only things I do where I don't look at my phone and I'm not thinking about other things. So in that way, it's just like literally a useful distraction. If I'm feeling really anxious or I'm thinking about something too much, I'll read or watch a film. But also, yeah, just like as we were talking about already, like it's a way to see other people and feel close to other people when you are feeling completely isolated or just lonely or unable to connect with the world in the way that you want to in that moment. Like to read a book in which you can feel connected to humanity is obviously a huge thing. Yeah.
Not only that words are actually healing, but they're also, I guess, an excuse and a tool for us to get away from, this saturation of content on social media. Mm-hmm. And what about you, Tracey?
Yeah, there's a quote from the choreographer Twyla Tharp, and it goes something to the effect of, who you will be 5 years from now is determined by the books you read and the people you meet. And I think in both of those instances, it's about empathy and connection. And obviously, the people you meet, that's pretty straightforward. But then the books you read, it's this window into another living, breathing, feeling, experiencing person's imagination. You get to experience like how they make sense of the world. You get to sort of engage your imagination with theirs. And it's such an intimate act. So like the number of times I have read a book and have learned something new about the world that I previously felt very ignorant about. And it's such a safe and intimate way of doing it, right? Like the book is never going to yell at me. The book is never going to be like, oh, you dummy, I can't believe you didn't understand that, right? It'll just sort of like embrace me and be like, come in, let me show you this world. In the same way that like my novel, which is set in Cabramatta, at no point is the book going to be like, I can't believe you didn't know about the Asian Australian community, right? It's sort of like,
can swear sometimes.
Swearing, but it's not swearing at freedom,
yeah.
And so in that sense, it's a way to learn in the most like empathetic. It's almost like being embraced in your brain.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting angle to look at because books are entertaining, but education is also kind of like gives you a sense of that comfort. Like just by enriching your knowledge, you feel a little bit better about yourself, a little bit safer in the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Also, I think growing up with pretty limited resources, I like to read books because it was enable me to travel to other places.
Yeah.
Very easy.
Yeah, especially during COVID-19. We couldn't go anywhere, and the only way to travel was by reading or watching. And we missed a little bit about the part where maybe how you got so passionate about writing and reading, maybe how your parents brought you up.
Oh, so I read very little when I was a kid. I loved TV and like trashy TV as well. Like I watched a lot of Judge Judy, Ricky Lake, like just the stuff that you would not really want your kids to watch.
We're going that he's all Judge Judy, that trashy. They're home for everybody.
Yeah, the reason why I was so into it was because, okay, I loved storytelling and drama. And this was like low-hanging fruit, right? You turn on the TV and there's storytelling and drama. Is it good for you? Probably not. But it was there. And the reason why I didn't sort of give reading much of a chance when I was younger was because my school sort of taught a lot of books that I found inaccessible and unrelatable. I remember in high school, we did Shakespeare, we did Jane Austen, and as you might imagine, like a 15-year-old kid in suburban Australia, I'm like, really? Like this is not, I mean, if this is what books are, maybe books aren't for me. So that's what I had in my head. I think this might just not be for me. And so instead I went to magazines because magazines like Dolly or Girlfriend, those were for me. And it wasn't until my early 20s when I read, a friend recommended George Saunders' Civil War Land in Bad Decline. And I read that and I was like, oh my God, this book is so funny and it's so accessible. Like, what have I missed out on? And from that point, I like read obsessively. But I do think there is a book for everyone. And that could be your gateway. You just have to find your gateway.
Yes, once you find that book that clicks, you can't put it down. Like you feel like you're watching a really good series. You're just like sucked into their world. And once it finishes, we all get really depressed, right? Yeah.
Actually, I have a question for Laksmi.
Oh, you have a question for me? What is your favorite of the contract? Just kidding. My favorite book, of course, it's Fragrant Rice by Janet DeNeefe. I don't have one favorite book, but I always recommend people to read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho just because it's such an easy read. I personally love that book. It's an easy read. It's easy to digest. It's enjoyable. It teaches you a lot about life. And I feel like a lot of my friends here in Indonesia, they don't really read. So to recommend something like that, it's I think perfect for beginners. And besides that, I love learning about things. I love history. So I really like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. And what am I reading currently? I like autobiographies.
I think as a reader, we can start by reading whatever we like. Nobody should judge you because you start reading Harry Potter, like I did, or anything, or I don't know, 50 Shades of Grey. I think it's your right, and it's just good to read.
Harry Potter is great, and reading should be enjoyable. So, what are your maybe two books that you suggest?
Oh my, it's really hard. Megan's book. It's really good.
Megan's book.
Yeah. I love Irish authors as well, but in the past I read a lot of Irish male authors, so I cannot say. I can say now. Cannot recommend anything.
Another female Irish author who I'm working through her back catalogue at the moment is Anne Enright. I really love her a lot. I also mostly read men until I was in my 20s, and so yeah, I also didn't read that many Irish authors until I was in my 20s, and realized that my favorite authors were all sort of the exact same genre of popular literary American male authors like Franzen and Bret Easton Ellis and all these people who are, amazing. I do still love them, but they were very up a type. So yeah, Anne Enright was the first Irish woman author who I kind of she kind of changed my reading habits a lot. So I'm a big fan of hers. And her new one called The Wren is really amazing. And she has another one called Actress, which is set in the theatre world. So I have a special fondness for that. But yeah, Anne Enright is my favorite right now.
Mm-hmm. Not Janet DeNeefe.
That's factor. You should check out more Indonesian books.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Claudia, have you ever read an Indonesian or book by Indonesian?
This is my fourth, but I'm very fascinating because I'm working in Ubud. I enter in libraries, so at the end of the trip, I promise that I will read something.
Eka Kurniawan is...
Yeah, Eka Kurniawan. I think if I can recommend 3 writers who are now here in this festival is Eka Kurniawan, Intan Paramadita, and Norman Eriksul Pasaribu and Dewi Lestari. It's just like very teeny tiny example. And they have been translated into English. So you should really read them.
And Laksmi Pamuncak is also really good. What about you, Tracey? Do you have 2 books to recommend?
I'll recommend something from Australia and something from America, since those are the 2 places I live in. So in Australia, it's a book that just came out this year. It's called The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brammer. And it follows a woman who is a death doula. So she's someone who helps people who are near the end of their lives, just process the fact that they are about to die. An incredibly life-affirming book. It's one of the lines I love from it is, to have a beautiful death, you have to live a beautiful life. And so it's one of those things where it's you will actually feel good even as you're reading about death. And then from the US, I would recommend anything by Ruth Ozeki. But my favorite from her is A Tale of the Time Being. Me too. It's incredible, crazy. And the voice is this young Japanese girl, and she's just electric. From the very opening line, she's just talking directly to you, and she just has a title. A Tale, is it A Tale for the Time Being?
A Tale for the Time Being.
A Tale for the Time Being.
And one of a very unique thing in that book is she uses her own name, her husband's name, just everybody just uses real name, but obviously it's not, I mean, it's fiction. It's crazy fiction. So yeah, it's, I mean, the first book that takes this form that I read. Yeah, it's such an amazing experience.
Yeah, so A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki.
So someone write that down. So I'm gonna.
The Australian one is The Collected Regrets of Clover.
The Collected Regrets of Clover. I think we're gonna make an Ubud writers and readers profile on Goodreads and then put all these books in there for people to read. Yeah. Yes, yes.
Sorry, I have to correct myself. I read an Indonesian writer.
Oh, you did?
Yes, Febi Indirani. Oh, Febi, it's my friend. She's my friend. Great, because there is a book of her translated in Italian. It's about religion. Wow, Italian. And the writer it's not about the Virgin Maria. The Virgin Maria, bukan Perawan Maria in Indonesia. Yeah. Yes, because after my first travel to Indonesia, I wanted to read something about that. And if I can suggest two books.
Yes, please.
One was in Ireland. That I really loved when I was younger. I love the books about friendship. Eureka Street. Eureka Street. By Clean Wilson.
Books about friendship.
I really love.
Is that the title? Books about friendship?
No, it's Eureka Street. That is a street.
You're reading that street. The title is
Eureka Street. Right, yes. I really loved. And another writer that I really love is Almudena Grandes. She's a Spanish writer, and my favorite that I always give to the play in English is The Frozen Heart, because it's beautiful because there's a long story between a Spanish Civil War and the dictatorship and the story of two families. And she passed away 2 years ago, but she has a lot of books, so anyone is good.
All right, we're going to pass on to the audience for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to make yourself feel like this is an actual book club, I want you guys all to engage and have your say.
Or say your favorite books.
Yeah, your favorite books. Let's engage and exchange books.
I have a question. Question from a mom who has two boys who are about, just 1.5 years apart. But they were younger. And still now, books that they have to read in schools, but also books that they read for later became a lot. And a lot means it's kind of become a burden for parents, right?
Oh.
And I actually don't know, because also in Cambodia, the community or reading in Cambodia is still quite new as well. So we don't really have a lot of places that we would go to exchange some books or, borrow. It will be nice every time we have to find a book, right?
Also, you don't have a lot of libraries where you can just borrow the books.
Also, some of them could be, qualified very university. And these boys read it overnight. And they said, well, later he's dead.
Oh my God.
Call me Dopat. And then, so I don't know. As a writer, I write cookbooks. I don't like version and everything. Yeah, so I don't know what would be your advice.
Thank you for highlighting that. I'm sure in Indonesia, a lot of the provinces here have the same problem, they don't have access to quality books or even books at all. And it's a challenge for parents who want their kids to read. To be honest, it's part of maybe a collective responsibility to sort of think about how we're going to provide for the children without having to spend a fortune, because we shouldn't spend a fortune just to read books, right?
Isn't that where ebooks come in? No, not that I major ebooks at all, but then they're cheaply accessible.
Yeah, the books are also expensive, and also you need the gadget as well to read ebooks.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have the gadget, and of course also internet.
Yeah.
We tried actually, because of that reason, we said, boys, what about, switch it to Kindles? We started going all the week. But they said, well, as soon as feel like we're
Until they do swaps for frames, the books that they...
Yeah, I think maybe your son or his daughter maybe could start a book club. And so you don't have to spend so much money on buying new books. You can just like exchange, pass them around. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Also, getting books secondhand.
Secondhand books.
Yeah.
Or making a book club between where you live and another country, and so exchange books through the both country, and maybe can be
Yeah. Like the movie. Is there a movie? No, those were jeans.
All the traveling pants.
Yeah. Oops. Okay. Yeah. But thank you so much for letting us know.
It is a big problem. Also, I'm poor also because I buy a lot of books.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a big problem.
Yeah.
But at the same time, writers also need to make a living. Kind of a dilemma there.
So I think for me, to be able to write is a huge privilege. To not really think about where I'm going to have my dinner, where my dinner will come from the next day. Because I think it's a very, very big privilege. And
Yeah. Do you want to like expand on that a little bit more, just to talk about maybe your struggle to become a writer and what did you have to sacrifice to be where you are now?
I don't know if anyone else can relate to my experience, but I used to have a real office job when I still lived in Indonesia to just fund my writing lifestyle. And I give up entirely right now. I don't live in Indonesia anymore. And I'm lucky to be married to such a great man who told me, just focus on your writing. You don't need to find a job. I'll do the job. And I was like, yes. Yeah. So, but it's still a struggle. Of course, I'm used to earn my own money, and it was not very little. It was a good office job. And now I don't anymore. But in the end, the most important thing for me is writing.
So I'm just curious whether like once you've done and completed your book, it's published, how do you feel?
Now, my experience is very small because I only published that series and there are 4 books. But I
It matters. Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I was satisfied because it was like chronics for me, because like a report is so the same that I've published in magazines and in newspapers in my own life, but with a different shape, and also for the different audiences. So it was like a step more compared with what I was doing before. So it was like a new achievement and capacity to talk about new people. So I was satisfied for that, and also because they were published in a very bad period because it was in the middle of the pandemic. In the books I speak about the places where you normally don't go to travel with your parents, because it's the war in Colombia and Venezuela, is Bolivia, when normally the people doesn't go to go to a resort, or Jamaica, where maybe people know the beaches, but not the problems of the girls and of the kids inside the island. So I was a little bit proud also because it was not only for the kids, but also for the parents, because a lot of adults are completely ignorant of the difficult situation that some country lives. So it was like not only for them, but also for us. Like,
Yes, that's amazing. We have someone from Colombia here. Do you have a question?
I actually do. It's based on what you were talking about before, about 100 Years of Solitude. And it's that, just like you, I started reading when I was in my 20s, really, because I was not interested when I was younger. But then Gabo died in 2014, and I thought, because I work at the Embassy of Colombia, Jakarta, in cultural affairs, and I said, how can I promote culture if I don't really know this facet of our culture, right? So I started reading his work in English because that's how I found it here in Indonesia. And then I said to myself, I don't think this is right. I'll find the Spanish version. I got it. And I started reading it. And it was totally different. It was actually a book that is meant to be read in Spanish. and I'm impressed how popular it became in other languages, but in Spanish is totally different. And I was wondering if you guys have had your work translated to other languages, and you have the chance to speak those languages as well, and you have read your work in a different language, and what do you think about it? And it has been translated already.
Yeah, what language did you write it?
I wrote it in a language that is not mine because I'm Italian, and I first wrote in Spanish. And then the version that they used for the English translation was the version that I wrote, and they just corrected and changed some words because my English is not perfect, of course. So, and they are very short stories. And so maybe the language is always mine because I wrote in my Spanish and they wrote in my English. But this is possible because they are very, very short. So I think that is completely different when you have your novel translated in another language. But the problem is maybe you don't speak the other language, so you don't.
My book myself. Yes.
I self-translated it, so
Wow.
yeah, I think I lost as little as possible. But I also worked with a translator before, Julia Winterflood, who also speaks in this festival. She translated like a little part of this book some years ago in 2020, I think. And we do it differently. And I think somebody said about her translation, comparing hers and mine. But in the end, to me, translation is a very crucial aspect in world literature so that, Cambodian literature is not only accessible to Cambodians, but everyone can read it. And of course, it has its minus and plus points. But in the end, it's something that has to be nurtured, translating. Yeah, I'm a translator myself.
Oh, amazing. I'm sure you guys write in English, but did you get your books translated?
Yeah, my first book was in now 13 languages, which is like really moving to me. And yeah, it's like my favorite part of the whole thing probably is like receiving them in the post and seeing them and working with the translators. I really love it. And the only other language that I speak that I can actually read it in is French. And I hadn't really read a book in French since I was maybe 18 or 19. So like seeing it and reading it in French felt really nostalgic for all sorts of reasons. And I really enjoyed that. But actually, I find the most striking is like when it's a language that I have no relationship to, like so it's in Arabic, and I remember opening that and like seeing the format, like recognizing the format from my edition, like my English edition, and knowing what it said. But obviously, it's a language that I have no relationship to, and I love like visually, I love seeing that. It was really exciting. Yeah,
You were like, I did not say that. No, but how did you decide what languages to translate your books into?
or just like anyone who asked.
Anyone who asked.
And that's it.
14 people asked you.
Yeah, just so they shop it around at things like Frankfurt Book Fair, and they try and like your agent tries to sell it to other territories once you're done with it, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Can't imagine how it feels to like see your actual writing in all these different characters.
Yeah, and all the work that goes into it by the translators is very, very moving to me. And like they really, everyone that I worked with really, really cared about it. And yeah, just like the very specific questions they asked, I found really impressive that they were putting this much thought into things that if I was doing their job, probably would have easily skimmed over. And they're, really working with me intensively about the like minutiae of how to describe a certain kind of Irish shrubbery or something,
Right. Yeah. Because you also have to put in like kind of your heart into translating, right? Because a lot of the words are difficult to translate. So you really have to feel the text and then translate it. What about you, Tracey?
Yeah, so the only language in which I read and write is English, but my novel has been translated into Dutch and Romanian and Italian, and there's a Japanese edition coming, and German. And so I get to see it once it's already done, and I'm like, looks good, I know, like the interior copy could be like Twilight, with just like one chapter of it, and I feel like, great.
Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, one question. Hi.
Hi, my name is David. I have a question since we're talking about the books that we love. And sometimes like you said about Harry Potter being the book that we love. And, sometimes our relationship with the authors changes over time. And how how to mend the broken heart from, problematic authors that, the world we love so much. You guys are, I think, a bit readers as well. And have you ever experienced that in a way that you really love the work, but then, news coming out and, the authors problematic or like some mistakes or like doing something that not aligned with your own values? And how do you, cope with that type of love, but you hate that so much also?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about J.K. Rowling. I'm still trying to heal from that as well. And I love Narnia. And as a Muslim and a woman, I have problem with Narnia, a lot of problem. But I love it. I still read it, and I still love it very much, every word of it. So yeah, I'm still trying to find out how I do it, how I cope with that. Yeah, I don't know about you guys.
There's a really good book called Monsters by a woman called Claire Deater, which is all about this subject. I don't know if you've read that. But yeah, she deals with like the process of what it's like to be a fan of monstrous artists who are morally corrupt or bad people or troubled people or whatever. And I don't think there's like a simple solution to it, but yeah, I experienced a little bit of this in a very minor way when, as I said, I was like a big Bret Easton Ellis fan when I was a kid, and then I don't know, he took this like anti-woke turn about 5 or 6 years ago. I just found it very embarrassing more than anything else. I was like, oh, that guy who I thought was so cool is now just deeply embarrassing to me. But then he kind of, in my opinion, redeemed himself lately, and like that was really healing for me. But I really enjoyed his newest book, and he seems to have like laid that stuff aside, and I felt really good when I saw him speak live recently. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you read, I don't know, the 20th century big American boy writers, a lot of them are they're not the best people, right? And yeah, I kind of like, I'm not going to stop myself enjoying them because I feel like that's doubly annoying. Then it's like you're a bad guy, and also I don't get to enjoy this book that I love, so I'm going to enjoy it,
Yeah, I think that's a big part of maybe cancel culture, because the author did something bad. Does it take away the quality of their work? That's something to think about also. Does your work have to relate to you? Do you have to have the readers sort of attached to the author, or is it simply enough for them just to like your work? Yeah, we have a question at the back.
Just to add to that, so I own a small bookshop in Jakarta, and interestingly, at my bookstore, so we really curate our collection, and we change our collection based on a theme, and we change the theme every 6 months. So it's very curated, and me and my business partner, choose them. And interestingly, our readers, they really look at who the authors are. So for example, whenever we sell books by white men, we cannot sell them. So it's very interesting. So our readers really research who writes the book. So there's another level of readership. I think based on my observation only, someone comes to a certain level of reading, yeah, they will really care about who the authors are. But they will be able to differentiate the art and the artist.
You have any thoughts on this?
No, I think that I'm being interesting of the life of the writers. I admit that sometimes I have prejudice because maybe I don't like the writer for some reason. And even if the book has been translated all around the world, I don't want to read because I'm not curious. And this happened for an Italian writer, for example. She's very appreciated, but I think that some incoherence between, I don't like, because sometimes writers come from very privileged world, and so it's something that, I don't know, I don't find interesting. And so it's very hard that I read the bestseller. Maybe I read the bestseller like 10 years later when everybody say, it's good, it's good, it's good. I promise it's good.
What about celebrity writers? Celebrities taking on writing, like they're writing, but then are they actually writing the book?
Oh, I think lately the woman who plays Eleven in Stranger Things, I think she published a novel. But she was very open. She was being very open about who actually well, they did it together. It's a collaboration between her and I feel bad because I can't remember the name of the writer. And she never once said that, yeah, I write the book. No, it's like we write the book. This is a work of two people. And I appreciate that instead of just celebrities who use ghostwriters and then just parroting around like, this is my work, and just eliminating the real writer behind it. But to be honest, I haven't read any of the celebrity books, so I cannot tell.
Yeah, me neither. I just put it out there. Yes.
We're talking about, the moral character of the writers and how that impacts how we approach the work. But what about from your point of view? Do you have ideal readers? And, what would be an ideal reader for you, apart from punch and paste when in book?
I had a funny experience between the first and second, where the first one was read almost exclusively by women and young women, and then the second one is a more it's more literary novel probably, and it's also a little bit more of a plot that's without it's not a gendered plot. The other one is very much a subjective young woman in obsessive love with a man. It has a particular resonance. And every single one of the reviews, when my first book was by a woman, and every single one of the reviews, my second was by a man. And I was really interested in that assigning. And so a part of me was excited to get some men reading my work, basically, because I felt annoyed the first time around that the genre and the subject matter was like alienating 50% of the people in the world. I'm just a little bit relieved to have my work read by both genders at last, basically. But ideal readers, I don't know. I think part of like the excitement of having any reader is that they're a mystery to me, and they're bringing something that I have no ability to control to my work, and that's really exciting and dynamic for me. So I think anyone who's like bringing their own consciousness to my work is exciting to me.
But do you or should you think about the readers when you're writing?
Sorry, in the end we have to, because sometimes that's the requirements of the publishers, for example, because you cannot just write anything. Then publishers cannot just, publish anything, right? So in a way, we have to also think about the readers.
No, in my case, it's strange because I really thought not in all the kids, of course, yes, but I wanted that my books come back to the kids that are the main characters of my books, because they normally don't appear, because it's very hard that you read a book about a Bolivian wrestler or about kids who make synchronized swimming in Jamaica. So the idea of my books was to give them back their main stories through my mother's voice. So I'm happy to be here, because one of the stories is based in Indonesia, and it's very hard to bring the books in Indonesia, even more if they are in Spanish. And so I would really love to go to the place where I found the stories and when I wrote them, just because it's thanks to them. Yeah. I wrote the stories. I guess it's more important that to know that how they're actually reading the book rather than who's reading the book. Like what do they get from reading the book?
Yeah. No, and also because I really thought that sometimes we have a lot of books, but sometimes the characters are always the same, because we are privileged readers and with privileged protagonists and in privileged context. And so my kids are not privileged. The context is very complex. And so I think that it's nice to thank them.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, I would like to end the session today. And thank you so much to our beautiful writers here, and of course, all of you guys.